It's heating up out there today, guys. Today is supposed to be the hottest day so far this year. So I thought today would be a great day to answer the million-dollar question. The problem is we can't really answer that question without taking into consideration the house envelope as a whole. These are envelopes. This is a house envelope. The real problem is that we can't answer this question without taking into consideration all the things that make up the house envelope, not just the SIPS. We'll try to take those into consideration as we go, and we'll kind of see how even the best of these red pieces are really not going to help you if you don't have good control of these over here. So really what we're doing is an assessment of the house envelope, and quite frankly, unfortunately, if you don't invest over here, no amount of investment here is going to save you. I suppose we should back up just a hair because it's easy to assume that the folks who've been watching our channel for a long time know exactly what I'm talking about. They understand what a SIP is, and they also kind of understand the other options, as in what are the alternatives to a SIP, or more appropriately, what is a SIP an alternative to? This is a SIP, or a structural insulated panel. Well, it's not the whole panel, it's just a small chunk that we saved to show people so they could understand what we're talking about. SIPs, or structural insulated panels, is kind of a more modern, I say more modern because they've been around for quite a while, building material. They're made up of three basic simple components. You have a skin, and most commonly this is made from OSB, and it is custom made OSB in most cases, because one of the benefits of the SIP is that the panels are really long. They're one piece. Inside is EPS foam, expanded polystyrene foam. And there is a very specific reason that this is not extruded foam. And then there's a small adhesive that actually bonds. It doesn't glue, it physically bonds the wood to the foam. And this adhesive is extremely strong. These are SIP panels that are fully installed. So it looks like a wall, but imagine that this panel is about 4 feet wide. You can see the joints, and this panel is continuous until it breaks behind this beam. And then this panel starts and goes all the way up to the roof. Some of the longest panels we have are 24 feet in length. We'll take a look at some of the other construction methods, but one thing that SIPs, or structural insulated panels, have in common with other building materials is that there are options for wall thickness. This panel is an 8-inch wide SIP, so the distance between these two is actually a nominal 7¼ inches, so that a 2x8 piece of lumber will actually fit in here. The outside dimensions are actually 8¼ inches. Structural insulated panels are available in different thicknesses for the obvious reason that they impart more and more of the insulative benefits of the panel. It is common to see SIPs in 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch, and 12-inch. I don't know if there's anything thicker than 12, but my goodness, where do you live if you need a 12-inch SIP? That said, our roof panels, which are also SIPs, are 12 inches thick. Wow. Now let's take a look at a more traditional, perhaps the most prolific building method that is used today. Since we only showed you a tiny sample of a SIP, I thought it appropriate to only show you a tiny sample of a stick-framed wall. So all the basics of a stick-frame wall are represented here. You have a sill plate, which is what will attach to the deck or to the foundation of your home. Then you have the load-bearing members, which are known as studs, a top plate, and then a secondary top plate, which connects the walls. High-efficiency homes are often spray foamed, where they actually use a spray foam inside the stud bay, and then they add additional insulation in the form of fiberglass bats. And that's how they achieve a level of performance that makes the house comfortable and energy efficient. There's just one small problem with the way a stick-built wall is designed. So wood only has an R value of about 1.4 per inch. So a 2x4 wall is about R5 or so. So even if you insulate the bays between the studs to say R30, the studs themselves only have an R value of about 5. But R value isn't really the only measurement of the heat resistance of a wall. There's a term used in engineering called a thermal bridge, and anything can be a thermal bridge. It's something that has the ability to conduct heat. And in the case of a stud wall or a stick-framed wall, the studs, the plates, and the top plates all are thermal bridges. Of course, this is an overly simplified wall. If we were to put a door in here or a window, there would actually be trimmer studs, king studs, headers, sills, and jack studs. And you can see that the wall would actually be quite full of thermal bridges. And that is where the SIP shines. There's no thermal bridge whatsoever. It's a solid chunk of foam. And there's no connection, no bridge between the outside of the structure and the inside. Therefore, there's nothing to conduct heat or from the outside to the inside or vice versa. Say during the winter, all of your heat is being conducted to the outside, or in the summer, as it is today, it's actually being moved to the inside. Ultimately, this will determine the efficiency and the comfort of the structure. So there you have it. That's the primary difference between SIPS and stick framing. We want to stay focused on the question of the day, which is, are the SIPS worth it? But to be fair, we can't just answer a couple of questions. We need to look at the whole picture to really be fair to SIPS. The blue column is important because I think in a lot of conversations people want to compare building materials based on the cost, difficulty, and what it takes to build it. So a lot of people are like, meh, I'm good at stick framing, SIPs are difficult, therefore stick framing's better. And I think it is good to consider the stuff on the blue side. For example, how much do the SIPs cost? Well, like a lot of things, if you take it out of context, you'll make the wrong decision. If you look at the entire benefit of a SIP, what it actually does, the whole thing, and you replicate it with all the necessary pieces to make an equivalent stick-framed wall, you'll probably find that the SIPs are actually cheaper. The difference is you've got to spend all that money up front. So you can't build a SIP one step at a time as you have money. You have to buy the whole doggone thing. So a stick-framed wall, you could build the wall, then you could insulate, then you could put some sort of foam on the outside to create a thermal break, and you could do all the same things over time, which may be beneficial for your project, but in the end, it'll cost you more money. The workflow is going to drive a lot of people nuts, and a lot of people who've been following us know that we don't have siding on our house, and a lot of people are just losing their marbles over that because they're so accustomed to how stick-framed houses are built that the thing you do after you put the walls up is put the siding on. And that's not how SIPs work. They actually have a small chase built into them for pulling wire. We don't put plumbing in the SIPs, but in honesty, putting plumbing in your exterior walls is stupid. If you've lived in a northern climate, I guess it's important to differentiate. If you live in a southern climate, do whatever you want. But in a northern climate, plumbing in your exterior wall, it's just going to be prone to freezing. So don't put your plumbing in exterior walls anyway. But the point is that the workflow is going to be backwards, and it drives a lot of people nuts because, well, that's just not how they were trained, and they think that's not how houses are built. As far as speed goes, I think it's easy to argue that you cannot beat the speed of SIP installation. The vast majority of the cutting and everything has already been done. Once the prep is in place, these houses can be put together in a day or 2 days, the entire house. It does require some specialized tools and a little bit of skill that's not inherent with stick framing, so just be aware that this is not stick framing. There's going to be a little bit of change, but you know what? If you can stick frame a house, you can definitely SIP a house. And then there's the reality of the crew. One man, because of the weight of lumber and because of the height of stick-framed walls, can build a stick-framed house. But it's pretty hard for one guy to build a SIP house unless you have some sort of crane that allows you to operate it as you're setting panels. Let's just say to do SIPs well, you're going to need a crew. That's the blue side. That's the construction side. I think it's too easy to forget all these factors. And I think the second one on the list is something that people focus way too much on, but it's good for marketing and it gets people interested because everybody has a budget, right? And everyone's hounding and yelling and screaming about efficiency. But I think that is second to comfort. If you're not comfortable, who cares how efficient your house is? And I think that's something that we want to touch on today, is how SIPS will not only create an efficient house, but we can speak to the comfort of the house. Also, the home value. SIPS are a high performance construction material, and because of that, certain people are willing to pay more because homes like this are unique and they want those things. So this can add some value to the home. It's not going to be a reason to do it, but it's a factor to consider. There are some tax credits which can help reduce the cost of your construction project, but this big guy down here at the bottom, that's something we need to talk about because that's where SIPs kind of fall on their face. So anybody who's been around construction for a while knows that SIPs kind of have a bad rap. And the short version of it is that there is a known weakness with SIPs, and that is moisture. And it's not rain falling from the sky. It's actually moisture that moves through the walls during the heating season, but can't get out because it's trapped either by the house wrap or the roof, or something is keeping that moisture from getting away. And there was a particular instance in Alaska where a large number of homes that were built with SIPs had rot in the roof. And it happened very, very quickly. This wasn't really a SIP issue, although it does relate to the SIPs as much as it was a workmanship issue, and then also just understanding how all the components work together. So to mitigate that problem, people will do things like what we did, build a cold roof. It's a secondary roof that enhances the drying ability of the SIPs that are in the roof. So if any moisture finds its way through, we've got this convective air movement through the roof underneath the metal that will dry the SIPs out. And we're able to manage that weakness. But it's real, and I think the reason we have to talk about that is because a SIP is not easily repaired. Think of it as the wall. Where a stick frame wall, you could slice and dice, take some components out, remove some sheathing, and you could essentially repair a wall that was damaged from moisture. But if a SIP gets damaged, there are two tools that I'm wanting to use today to kind of help us understand what we're looking at. One is this infrared thermometer, and the other guy is this little toy. This is a FLIR attachment for an iOS device. A wonderful subscriber actually sent it to us as a gift, and we actually did an unboxing and kind of messed around with it a little bit to kind of share what it's capable of doing. This tool should be very helpful in looking at the walls through the infrared spectrum, what our eyes cannot see, and it'll help us to understand how the different components of our house envelope relate to the efficiency and comfort of the house. So let's start out here and first kind of take a look at what the heat is doing on the outside of the house. And then we'll go inside and kind of take a look at what the SIPS is achieving on the inside. Wow, so we're looking at the outside of the house, and I mean, it's pretty brutally obvious where the hot spots are. And of course, right now we're in the summertime, so what we're trying to do is keep the heat out. Of course, we're getting a lot of weird readings, so things like over here in the dark spot on the bottom, you're not gonna be able to see my hand, there it is. Over here, there's actually some waterproof membrane and things like that that are black, and they're going to pick up a lot of the temperature or the radiant warmth from the sun. Kind of interesting, you can actually see where the shadow is from the eave on the roof. Isn't that cool? That's exactly why we built that overhang. So it looks like we're getting readings of about 115 degrees in the yellow, and that's most of the SIP walls. It looks like the red areas for about here, 135, and I'm guessing that's the black part. Yep. So that part of our doors is actually the casing or the frame, and it's actually black, so it's picking up a lot of heat. Look at that. And this white part here is actually the Tyvek wrap that we use for the flashing on the sills. It's white. So it's actually not picking up a lot of heat at all. It's quite a bit cooler than the wall even. So almost a 30-degree difference there. So our garage doors are brown. And look at that, they are picking up a tremendous amount of radiant heat, 148 degrees on the outside. So that gives you an idea. We're looking at between 115 degrees and 140 degrees in the worst spots. That's how much heat is being forced towards the house. Looking more precisely at the garage doors, look at this, guys. So this part down here that's in the sun, this stuff's been in the sun almost all day, 162 degrees. That would just flat out burn you if you touched it. Of course, the concrete that's around it, it's a little bit cooler, 130 degrees. So that concrete's going to be sending some warmth into the house. And look at the SIPS over here. Of course, this is just wood, so we're not making a judgment based on this. We just want to know. About 123 degrees is roughly the temperature of the wood on the outside. And the glass is about 100 degrees. So this is why I say you can't just look at SIPS and ask the question, are SIPS worth it? I think you have to look at the whole picture, because if you don't, you're not getting a fair assessment. So according to our high-tech thermometer here, the ambient temperature outside is 88, and we're warming up in the house just slightly to 72. And something you'll find fascinating, we'll talk about this a little bit later, is how consistent the temperatures are. The garage, where we're at now, 72. Living area, 72. And the loft, 72. Isn't that strange? So we had temperatures on the outside of this garage door at 150 plus degrees. Let's take a look at the iPad and see what's going on in here. There's no denying where the structural members are in the doors here. It looks like the hottest part of the doors is about 88, 89 degrees, and the cooler parts of the doors are in the 70s, high 70s. So there's no debating that this garage door is contributing to the heat gain here in the garage, right? But look at the SIPS. All around it, the SIPS are 71. So these areas are getting a little bit warmer, 75 near the man door there. I think the outside of this man door, the worst offender, was like 140, 150 degrees. And you can see that where this glass pane is installed, there's definitely a massive heat transfer, 94 degrees. But right next to that man door is a SIP that is 73 degrees. Interestingly, this header up here, which is above the garage door, is not actually a SIP. We built this header, and it is built just like a SIP. And look at that, it's holding 71 to 72 degrees. So even though it's made from traditional materials, it's not transferring the heat. Let's zoom in a little bit and see if we can kind of pick on the SIPs a little bit. So this tiny little SIP right here, this little guy that we're looking at in the middle here, the pink one, there's actually lumber on both sides of that SIP, just like a stick-framed wall. And it looks like if you get kind of close to the edge here, it's hard to say if that warmth is coming from the door or if that's actually being transmitted from the lumber. The way I see it, it looks to me like the lumber is actually transferring some warmth there. It's not a lot though, like maybe 1 to 2 degrees. And out here in the middle, where there is no lumber, it looks like that's about 77 or so. So let's take a look at the living area and see what we find. We're looking at the south wall, which is what we were looking at outside. And it's kind of interesting. If you look, you see all the red kind of on the lower left side, but how the upper right side is kind of greens and yellows. There's actually shade halfway across that door at an angle. So it's kind of interesting to see the effects of the sun on this door. Interestingly, this is a wooden door and it has no real insulative value whatsoever. It's about 1 inch thick, so it's probably about a 1.5 R value. So even though the glass is a low E glass, this door is not doing much for the heat load of the house. That's true during the winter too, right? So if we're heating the house, this door is losing heat to the outside. But right next to that, it looks like our SIPs are about 79 degrees. Let's get closer. I feel like this FLIR, it takes a sample of a certain area. There we go. So this SIP panel, which is currently in the sun, is 80 degrees, and this window, the lower portion of which is in the sun, the frame, the wood, is actually transmitting 98 degrees to the inside, but the SIP right next to it is about 79 degrees. This is the north wall, which of course is not in the sun right now, and it looks like we've got 76 degrees or so on this wall. Let's get in closer. Like I said, I wonder if this is taking a sample. There we go. Let's call that 77 degrees. And then here's a window over here. Again, it's got a wooden frame, and that wooden frame is 85 degrees because it has no insulative properties whatsoever. So even though outside we're pushing 90 degrees, inside the SIP is able to maintain somewhere around 77 to 78 degrees. This is something we'll talk about in a little while. But this is the north wall, and what you're looking at right now is the peak of the roof. And there's no denying that we've got a heat issue here. Although we know what it is, we actually have never sealed this gap between the wall and the roof. That's a whole nother conversation, but I'll show you in a little bit this same basic image, or from the outside, and how this was hurting us during the winter. Even though the SIPs were doing a fantastic job, obviously getting the house sealed up is going to net us a much improved efficiency. So there's a lot of heat, and that's pressure from outside, the high pressure from the heat pushing its way in and increasing the temperature on the inside. Something I wanted to mention, and I wanted to look at one more time, around these windows on the south wall, there is an additional lumber component. Because of the amount of doors and windows, the engineer specified more lumber. The SIP company actually wanted us to frame this just like a stick-framed wall, and knowing what we know about stick-framed walls and SIPs, we thought, why would we do that and spend all the money on SIPs? So we end up having the engineer make some adjustments, and we end up using less lumber. I really can't see in this image the lumber around the windows and doors. It's definitely not brutally obvious. It looks like the middle of this SIP is about 79 degrees, and if we move over to the edge, it's hard to say if we're looking at the lumber right there, that light bluish color. That could be the lumber transmitting heat, and it looks like it might be a couple of degrees or so that maybe is moving through it. I guess it's hard to say because there's obviously so much heat gain coming through this glass and this wood frame windows that it's possible that it's related to that, not the lumber in the wall. So that kind of gives us an idea what the SIPs are physically doing as they're fighting or resisting this energy gain. In this case, the heat is outside and we're trying to keep it from coming inside. Of course, during the winter, it's inside and we're trying to keep it in here instead of letting it escape. So if I remember right, the outside wall temperatures were around 115 degrees, and we're showing the inside wall temperatures around 77 degrees. So what is that? About 40 degrees, 38 degrees or so temperature differential. The only way we're ever going to have a material that will completely resist heat gain would be to live in a vacuum. But we can't live in a vacuum, so we're trying to improvise. So that gives us kind of an idea how well the SIPs are performing. In this case, this is the hottest day of the year so far, and the sun on our property is brutal, and that's why it's so comfortable in the house right now. We are approaching the hottest part of the day. It's just after 2 o'clock, so the heat now is going to become the worst it'll be all day. Right now we're 72 degrees inside. I would expect that by the end of the day, or by maybe dinner time or so, the outside temperature to peak between 91 and maybe 94 degrees, something like that. And I would expect the temperature inside to peak probably around 76 or so. 76 with no air conditioning on a 92 to 94 degree day, we can live with that. I wish I would have taken better video during the winter, and I just didn't. I feel like I was still kind of learning how to use the FLIR device, and it was cold outside. But I did take some photos, and I think they're really great for analysis. I'll show you a few of them, and it's pretty interesting what we found. We'll get to that one in just a minute, but let's take a look kind of at the front of the house. It's kind of hard to see, but this one we're actually pointing the thermometer portion of the FLIR at the windows. And that window is showing about 20 degrees. And here we're aiming the thermometer at the SIP, and that's showing 19.8 degrees. This is actually the concrete in front of the driveway or in front of the garage, and you can see the heat loss underneath the door that's actually moving through the concrete and escaping, and how quickly that heat dissipates. Here we're aiming at the garage door glass, and we're showing about 25 degrees or so. Keep in mind that the inside of this house is about 68 degrees. So we're showing minimal temperature loss. It's still some, and obviously it's no secret where that energy loss is located. The SIP, on the other hand, is only 17 degrees, and I think we might even be pointing at the man door on that one, maybe not the SIP itself. This one is definitely the SIP. The SIP itself is 11 degrees. And let's get back to this one. This is the one I was telling you earlier that will just tell a story. So we did have a tiny bit of trouble keeping the house warm through the winter. And when I went outside with the FLIR, it became brutally obvious where we were losing a gross amount of our heat. You can see it's a little deceptive. These reds are a little dramatic. The temperature difference between the wall and that window might be about 2 to 3 degrees. It's not a lot. But right up here in the ridge of our north wall, where we have not sealed the gap, look at all that heat loss. That's just incredible. To add to that, the roof looks fantastic. It's one consistent temperature, which means the roof SIPs are doing their job well. This FLIR, let's not put too much stock in it. I think it's a good diagnostic device, but it's not high resolution, so you're not going to be able to get super granular with it, but you can see areas that are obviously costing you energy and potentially costing you comfort. I feel like looking at this stuff, having invested in this building material and spent a lot of our time in our life building this house, looking at this stuff either is going to make you feel really good about yourself or really bad. And I think at the end of the day, we have been living, physically living. There's no science here. This is in practicum in this house for about 7 months now, give or take, through the winter. And we've been through the cold, and today, 94-ish degrees. Now, we're not in the south. It's not crazy humid or anything like that. But I would say that Alyssa and I are very comfortable in this house. I worked really hard on a project over the winter and then this spring that shows this kind of concept over time. So we kind of get rid of the theories behind all this stuff, and we look at data over time that helps us understand what is this structure doing. So let me kind of show some of that stuff to you, and you'll kind of see the trends and the patterns in temperatures outside and inside. So starting in February, the coldest month that we have here, I actually began tracking the temperatures and the humidities. There's so much more to this video that we could create, but we just can't share it all, not in one. But we started tracking the temperatures just like you saw on the thermometer, outside, garage, loft, and the living area, both the high temperatures for the day and the low temperatures. And I did that for the months of February and March. I worked way too hard at it. There's probably a piece of technology that'll do this for me, but I did it manually anyway. And then I tracked those same things during the month of June. June normally gets pretty stinking hot. In fact, there's a couple of days here early in June where we had a 93-degree high temperature. But we also get some decent low temperatures, which is why it's kind of a fun month to track. And then I charted those temperatures, and I think this visually is really helpful. So during February, you can see that the temperature in the garage is just steady as a rock. There's one day here where the temperature dropped, and that was, it looks like the temperature that day was probably like around 13 degrees or something like that. And it looks like we actually lost 1 degree in the garage. So that's helpful. It's very constant, a good consistent temperature. But the loft and the living area, not so consistent. And that really goes back to that image on the FLIR that I showed you, losing all the heat through the ridge. You can see that the patterns kind of follow each other. So where the outside temperature was really low, the inside temperature dipped, and of course as it warmed up around 30 degrees, so did the house and the living area. And it looks like we were pretty consistent, like around 59 degrees. If you averaged it out, the loft and the living area, maybe around 58 to 59 degrees most of the winter during the coldest months. But where this gets really interesting is on the low temps in February. So the low temp in the garage, pretty consistent, but you can see when we got down to 0 or a negative temperature, we started losing ground in the garage. So we would drop off of that 68 temperature. I think the lowest we saw in the garage was like 62. And the lowest that we saw in the loft was somewhere like around 48 or something like that. So the temperatures are pretty consistent. Now, I have to remind you that this is not sealed up. So the house has a long way to go towards efficiency. I'm just sharing this with you because I feel like it's kind of like a good teaser of what's to come. And then here in March, the garage is just steady as a rock. And you can see the temperatures outside, high temperatures, climbing from the 30s up, 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 up. By the end of March, we actually had like a high 70-degree day. But look at the temperatures in the house. They're super consistent, somewhere between 58 and 62, and up here on the high end around 68. So we like to see that when you see this going on outside, right? This temperature's all over the place. And same thing with the low temps. Look at the house, it's fairly consistent. I mean, there's some change there. It's up and down a degree or two, maybe 3. But the outside temperature, we actually saw a negative 12-degree day early in March. It was the coldest day of the year. And it looks like our living area actually got down to 51 degrees that day. So that's important because that's almost a 70-degree temperature differential from outside to inside. 70 degrees from here to there. That's a huge difference. And the garage wasn't able to maintain either, but of course once that low temp came back up, our garage jumped back up. And last of all, let's look at June. So it's just crazy. If you look at these temperatures through here, how consistent they are. I mean, they're just within a degree or two of each other all throughout that month. But here's the high temp outside. Look at it kind of all over the place. I mean, like we said, there were some low 90-degree temperatures in here. Looks like we had some high temperatures in the low 60s kind of mixed in there. But the house, the garage, and the loft, just steady as a rock. It's good to see just a little bit of fluctuation in there. I do want to disclose, though, that with the low temperatures, what we've been doing is we've actually been opening the windows in the evenings because we don't live in the south and we don't have 95-degree temperatures at night. It does cool off here in the northwest, thankfully, and that's how we're able to do this. So at night, there's actually going to be a lot of fluctuation in the low temperatures, although they're still pretty consistent across the board. And I made some notes for myself because not every single day is everything the same. I mean, we're living in this house. It's not a closed up scientific box. So we might see an excessively low temperature. I remember there was a couple of days where we actually left the garage door open all day long, and that might have contributed to an artificially high temperature. You know, it's something we might not normally do, but for whatever reason it was necessary, and that's going to be represented in this data. But I think it's pretty clear, you know, that these temperatures are just really consistent, and that's a big factor in comfort in a house. Let's jump back for just a second to the winter temperatures. Something I didn't share, and for those who haven't been following us for a long time, you're not going to know this. We were heating this entire house with one 8,000 watt electric heater. I think the BTU equivalent of that heater is around 24,000 BTUs. This house is approximately 3,600 square feet. If you do conventional BTU calculations, that heater is inadequate by a mile. So that's not communicated in these temperature tracking charts. What exactly was our heat source? I would say we were shocked. I was shocked that we were able to maintain any semblance of a warm house with one heater. Now, I will say the power bill, It was pretty legit. But, you know, that's just electricity, and we do have cheap power here, which is how we were even able to do that at all. Of course, long term, we're looking at employing the radiant that we have in the floors, and we're looking at using wood for a heat source during the winter months. So we're working on all that stuff. But the very fact that we're even able to heat this house 3,600 square feet with one 8,000 watt heater and keep it reasonably comfortable. Of course, to some folks, 62 to 65 sounds chilly. During the winter, that's actually pretty warm. You might have to put on an extra layer, but that's a lot cheaper than trying to crank the heat to 72 or 75 degrees. We're able to heat this house with an exponentially smaller heat source than we probably should be able to. But I think that's partly because the BTU calculations that people use are not based on SIP high efficiency homes. Just for fun, just to remind myself how ridiculous this whole thing is, I just ran a BTU calculation on raising this house 70 degrees. So if it's outside -12 and inside we want it to be 62 degrees. This is saying that with very good insulation, we would need 118,000 BTUs. And we were keeping this house 70 degrees warmer than outside with 24,000 BTUs. So 1/5, 1/6 of the rough calculation. Come on, guys, that's pretty ridiculous, really. One other thing to kind of wrap this video up a little bit, I think we've presented a really strong case. Of course, we're not SIPS salesmen, so we could care less whether you buy SIPS or not. I think what we're trying to do is articulate our experience with SIPS so that if you're deciding to build with SIPS, or gosh, I don't know, if you're just ridiculously curious and you have no intention to use SIPS at all, now you know. But one thing that's really hard to communicate is comfort. That's more an intrinsic thing, something that you feel. And something that's hard to communicate is in this house, near this window, near this wall, when it is -12 degrees outside. When you go outside in a t-shirt, you immediately clinch up because it's so cold outside. We were standing right next to this window, right here, within 6 inches, having a conversation in a t-shirt. There's so much going on there, and this is another factor if we were to create another video and talk about some of the benefits of the SIPS that the thermal break creates, is that this wall is not going to condensate in the winter, and since it's not cold right near the wall in that first couple of inches, it doesn't feel cold when you're standing next to it. And these are those really hard to quantify things about comfort. We had people email us while we were building this house and say that they've been in a SIP house before and it was insanely comfortable. But again, I can't really create a chart to explain that. But once you've felt it, if you've been in a house, even if it was kind of chilly outside and you got near the wall, say you're sitting at a table reading a magazine and you just kind of felt this chill come over you, there's none of that in this house. Well, there it is, guys. There's the low 90 high temps we were expecting. We're holding 73 in the house. I would say it's super comfortable. Of course, like they always say in all the EPA brochures and things, turn your thermostat up in the summer, right? Don't try to hold 68. There's a number out there and it's just exponentially more energy if you're trying to run your air conditioner and get it down to 68 degrees. I think they say to set it to 75 or something like that. I can't remember. We don't have air conditioning, so it's not a big deal. We're kind of victims of our building design. Of course, there's a lot more to this. We have ICFs, we have an earthen basement, we have concrete. There's a lot going on here that we can't share in this video. But I think it's pretty clear we can communicate using numbers that this house does a really great job of moderating the temperature inside. So would we say it's comfortable? Absolutely. Obviously, we have a long way to go. We've got to get the SIP sealed up. Once we kind of get the house furnished and get some mass in there, I think it'll even do a better job of regulating its temperature throughout the day. We've basically just got a big empty box at the moment. So once we get things sealed up and the house kind of takes on its full dimension, I have a hunch that this house is only going to get to be more comfortable. Do you guys hear that? Do you hear how quiet it is? That's another one of those things that really creates comfort in a home is the environment. And we feel like the SIPs do a fantastic job of limiting sound. Even though this is a big empty box right now, we feel like the house is pleasant. Coming up here in the afternoon to take a nap or sleeping at night, obviously, has not been a problem at all. I guess where it's really evident is when it's really loud outside, like during a windstorm or when it's raining really, really hard. It's still very pleasant to be in here, and it's not hard at all to film or to have a really great conversation. There were many times during this home build where we were having to wait for our SIP panels because of delays at the manufacturer, problems with the design. There's so much that we really can't communicate about the SIP experience, but if you haven't already seen the playlist of the videos, go back and watch us get these SIPs, get them installed, and kind of the journey or process that it was for us. Obviously, professionals could have done this much quicker and more efficient, but I would say that our engineer encouraged us to wait if we could for the SIPs. He reinforced that we would be very happy if we did, and I think in the end we're very happy. But obviously there are some things that are coming up that are going to present challenges. For example, getting the electrical and the plumbing and things set in this house they're going to be difficult. So we haven't faced those challenges just yet. So we haven't really got the full SIP experience, but we're looking forward to doing that stuff, and we think that once that's complete and we get to live in the house, the SIPs will have been well worth it. SIP-type technology is becoming the standard. Building and energy conservation codes are beginning to require thermal breaks in the building envelope to reduce energy requirements and simultaneously increase the comfort. This is true of stick building, masonry, and concrete homes, not just SIP homes. Of course, many people moving into these new high-efficiency homes probably have never heard of a thermal break. They will, however, be pleasantly surprised by the comfort and lower energy costs. Sorry we didn't get to use you today, Mr. Thermometer. You're just kind of one more piece of technology that's been replaced by an iPad.